to talk a little bit about Aoba Matsuri. So this is June 15th. It's the Kobo Daishi's birthday. So this is the date that it's typically celebrated at Shingon temples. So we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. So practically speaking, at temples here in the U.S., Aoba Matsuri is celebrated on a Sunday before or after the actual holiday, out of convenience for people's schedules. But in Japan, it is celebrated on the 15th, which due to the time zone difference was yesterday in Japan. So if we look at the website and Facebook page for Koyasan, they have the parade, the service, and they have a nighttime parade too with the float. So it's a pretty festive time. So thankfully, it's summer, so people can go out and do those kind of things. So there's quite a bit of celebration. Included with that is throwing the mochi. So they usually throw the mochi for good luck. People pick up the mochi and see who can get. Sometimes old grandmas get very competitive about that one. And sometimes there's also services to recognize elder members in the temple to show gratitude towards them for all their years of service. So it tends to be a very festive occasion. So probably Bon Dance, Aoba Matsuri, New Year's are probably the more festive services within the temple. So it can be a lot of fun. So if you happen to be near a Shingon temple around June 15th, check their schedule and go to the service and get some gifts, because there's usually something being given out too. So this is Kobo Daishi's birthday. So the exact day itself is a little bit mysterious. We do know it's the 6th month. That part is for sure. But the actual date, there could be some debate. It is agreed upon and it's celebrated on the 15th. So this is the actual date. So one thing that you can be sure of with Shingon, especially with Kukai, is there's a tremendous number of stories about his life, things he did, and folk tales like that sometimes obscure the historic record because he was held in such high esteem. It was, I think, almost considered the proper thing to do to embellish stories a little bit. So what we do have, though, because of his rank, because he attained quite a high status during his lifetime, so it wasn't a teacher that people discovered and held up as an example afterwards. During his lifetime, he was well known. There's quite a bit of historic record that is available. So in terms of a lot of these things, there's no debate in terms. But the early years, birth to when he went to college, there's not a tremendous amount of information that we could say with surety. But these stories too come out of a tremendous faith in Kobo Daishi. And that faith, if we look at Shingon in the United States, is reflected in the fact that every Shingon temple in Hawaii has Kobo Daishi as the main image, not one of the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas. So here we have Mahavajrayana Dainichi as the main image, but in Hawaii, all the temples, it's Kukai. I think LA is Dainichi, Sacramento is Kanon, Seattle is also Dainichi. So it's going to be a little bit different, but you see how strong the faith is among the people. That was the primary thing. So sometimes Shingon and faith in Kobo Daishi are almost talked about as like separate religions in many ways. Like there's Kobo Daishi faith. So a lot of times people wouldn't necessarily associate themselves with a particular temple, but they'll be have an image of Kobo Daishi at their home, or have a strong association because they're in a province that has a lot of stories about Kobo Daishi's life. So that's just kind of the natural. He's the local hero and saint. So there's just a lot of faith there. So Kukai was born on the island of Shikoku in the year 774 in Sanuki province. And Sanuki, if you go to a Japanese restaurant and you ever see Sanuki udon, the udon noodles, it comes from the Sei province, so it's very famous. So if you go to that province, there's a lot of good udon to have to eat. So I always try to eat udon when I go. And his birthplace is in current Zensuji city. So there's a city there, and at the center of that city there's a massive temple. So that marks his birthplace. So he was born into a family of middle noble rank. So if you read the official historical record of Japan, this family is mentioned as having nobility, but they weren't in the capital. So they was kind of out in the provinces. So it's the Otomo clan, which is mentioned in the Nihongi. So the early stories of Kukai's birth mirror a lot what you think of in terms of any sort of holy person. There's going to be sort of signs and maybe a dream. So a lot of these things mirror the Buddha's birth, where the Buddha's mother had a dream about the child, or there's a holy man that visits and talks about the future of the child, something along those lines. So all of those stories, it's going to be difficult to know just how accurate they are, or if they were embellished later, just because Kukai is a huge presence in the spiritual world of Japan. There's probably, if you mention Kobo Daishi Kukai to the average person in Japan, or oh yeah, they're still very well known. So when he was born, he was given the name Mao, which means true fish. And some speculation on that is, Japan was a fishing culture, so children were given names that came from the ocean or things like that. And I believe Zen-Tsuji used to be a lot closer to the ocean than it is now. So that may have been due to, there's a bay, but currently that bay is pretty far. But I think they've reclaimed some land for farming. So there's some discussion about that. Another name that's in the record is Totomono, meaning precious or treasured. So that's a pretty common thing. A lot of cultures, you have nicknames or something like that versus a formal given name. So there's also a lot of folk legends regarding Kukai's childhood. In my opinion, the importance of those is they're more impactful when you actually travel to Japan and you're in that village and they're telling you the story. Then it's very touching. But we could go on and on and on about those stories, and they may not have the same level of impact as when you're there. So I'll try to talk about some of them, but not get too deep into the folk tales, just because, at least in my opinion, when I was in Shikoku, when you're standing there under the tree and someone's like, in this very spot, then it's like, oh, this is a good story. But outside that environment, maybe not so impactful. So I don't want to ruin a good story. What is said, though, is that in Kukai's youth, he was already very pious, so that he would recite sutras as a child, make offerings to the Buddhas, and offer incense and things like this. Some people think that type of story is also embellished. However, in my opinion, that kind of behavior is not uncommon amongst children who go on to show a strong interest in Buddhism. So I don't think that that's necessarily an embellished story. You'll find stories about that today. In fact, I know someone who's watching this video has a story about that regarding their childhood. So this is a normal thing within the Buddhist world. What's kind of unique, though, is that there are some temples in Shikoku that have sculptures that were carved by Kobo Daishi, and many were carved when he was older, but some are said to have carvings from when he was a child. So as making playthings and items, and those things were enshrined in temples later. So making Buddha statues. So that's a little bit more unusual, but still, I think, well within the realm of possibility. So his family lineage and those kind of things is a matter of historical fact, and it's very well known. So they show up in Japan, just like China was a type of culture that recorded a lot of things, had a lot of recorded history. So those things are well documented in other places. So what is interesting to me, though, is just the proliferation of folk tales. There's probably more folk tales about Kobo Daishi than anybody else in Japan. But I think it does show the impact he had on Japan and on the people. And just 1,200 years or more later to still have that many folk tales about a person is pretty unique. So really important. So I thought about, well, what's a good way to tell something about the story, but also give you a flavor of how it's understood in Japan. So I thought, well, this is in many ways, like our Christmas. um, but if you're learning about Christmas outside of a Christian culture, you might not have a good flavor for what Christmas is like. So Christmas can't really be separated from Christmas carols, Christmas songs. So I'm gonna quote from a poem called the Namu Daishi Wasan. It's a poem usually recited by people who have a really strong faith in Kobo Daishi. It would be well known amongst a lot of people in Japan. Today, maybe not so much, but going back to the 60s and earlier, definitely, people would sing this. So Wasan is a poem style. It's the 7-5-7-5 meter rhyme style. Of course, we'll lose the rhyming because it's in English, but we'll go through a little bit of that, at least the part of it that tells his early life. So in a lot of Shingon temples, people would sing this song. This would be part of the service. So I know within the last 24 to 36 hours, there's been a lot of singing of the Namu Daishi Wasan. So it starts off with, on the 5th day of the middle decade of the 6th month of the 5th year of Hoki, in the Baron's Hall on the shore of Byobu, in the land of Sanuki, a bright light shone. It was the birth of our great sage. So this is the first opening portion. So I think it kind of does. There's a lot of foreshadowing about someone very special has come to Earth. So that first line is really the traditional way of recording the date. So it's pretty accurate using the lunar calendar. Talking about when he was born. And Kobo Daishi writes about also his birth time and refers to kind of very poetic language of when the sunlight hits the leaves of a particular tree, and that would equate to the 6th month, just when the leaves come out in that part of the world. So, but what I want you to do is think about Kobo Daishi's life in terms of our own life. So what were we doing at that age? What did people think of us when we were children? Did we show promise, and what kind of promise? And what did we do with our life versus what he did with his? And then I think the story, whether folktale or fantastical, maybe has a little bit more meaning. So it goes on. When the lad was but 5 years old, he would sit constantly among the lotuses and there hold converse with the Buddhas. But what he spoke of, he never told, not even to his mother. So there's stories about Kobo Daishi, meditating, going off, and what looked like play was actually spiritual practice. So again, in my experience, that's not completely uncommon with certain children, especially ones that end up showing proclivity towards spiritual work later on. But I think there's this sort of foreshadowing that he is a special child, and that was even recognized during his life, that something a little bit different, and that his spiritual cultivation started young. So you see this sometimes with children. You'll notice that they're a little bit more introspective, a little bit more prone to reading, a little bit less prone to roughhousing and typical kind of childhood games. And, people notice that. In our modern culture, you may get put in a gifted and talented program. But at this point, there was sometimes a tendency to get involved in spiritual practices. So the Wasan continues, in his heart there arose a desire to save mankind from all their sorrows and pains, and he sought on Mount Shashin to accomplish this desire by the sacrifice of his own life. Then angels came and saved him from death. So this is a well-known story about Kukai as a child, and there's a story that he climbed up to a cliff and made the vow that if his life was going to be meaningful, if he really was going to be able to go on and help people and work for the benefit of humanity, that even if he flung himself from the cliff, he would be saved. So it says that he did, that he threw himself from this cliff and the heavenly beings came and rescued him. there's actually a pretty famous poem of, he's going off the mountain with his hands in Kosho, and here come the angels to save him. So I've been to this area. So it's Temple 73, Shushakuji, on the 88 Temple pilgrimage. And if you go to that temple, there's a very peaceful, you'd say like bucolic scene, small farmhouses, very beautiful area though. A lot of people growing, very flowers, a couple rice paddies and things like that, but very, very beautiful. And there's this very stark cliff that rises up from one of the mountains. It's this kind of sheer cliff face. And I think it's probably a very beautiful place to go do spiritual practice. It's, you're surrounded by this beautiful plain, but you have this hill, big hill, almost mountain. Probably take you half a day or so to climb up there, where you could probably get away and do some contemplation. So this is one of those stories that when you think about it, and you actually look at that cliff, and you're standing at the temple that marks the spot, it has more impact than if you hear the story probably for the first time tonight in the temple or watching this video. So that's important, but I think it shows sort of the level of resolve that he was believed to have, and the seriousness which he pursued Buddhism, and that I think is undeniable even from a young age. So one of his first books, the Sango Shiki, the indication of the three teachings, he wrote when he was just leaving college at 19 or 20. So these are things I clearly were much on his mind for a long time. So I think the story kind of goes along with that. Really great determination. It's something that you probably don't hatch this plan overnight. It's something that you've been thinking about for a long time. In the old days, the temple used to be on top of the mountain, but they moved it because so many pilgrims, and it's hard to get up there. So now you just look up there, and you're like, oh, but the temple's down closer. So it goes on. So whilst at play, he built himself a pagoda of clay. The 4 heavenly kings came at once and stood guard over it. The imperial messenger, passing by, saw the prodigy and was amazed. This, he said, is a divine prodigy. So if you go on to Temple 75, which is Zensuji, it's a temple that Kukai built in honor of his father. And that temple has a museum. And in the museum, there is a clay pagoda. And it's said to be the one that he made when he was a child. And there's some other items from his childhood said to be from that time. So I think you see this, long-standing tendency towards spiritual interests, as evidenced by these artifacts, I guess you could say now after all this time. So in the beginning, I mentioned gratitude. So at Aoba Matsuri, there's often a recognition for elders in the temple and things like that. Buddhism teaches sort of the Eightfold Path, which includes guidelines for right behavior. And when we think of right behavior, I think sometimes we automatically think, well, there's right and then there's wrong. I think we should think of it more in terms of what's helpful and not helpful. And if we have a particular goal in mind, what things are going to help us towards that goal? And if those things are going to help us attain that goal, then they're right. And if they're not helping us as they're hampering us, then maybe we can say they're wrong, or at least not helping us get to that goal. In many ways, I think then we think about our own aspirations. What do we want? Where do we want to get? And are our actions actually helping us get there or not? And then in that way, the Eightfold Path becomes something that we live and can actually use in daily life, rather than just something we read and it's kind of flat. But if you look at Zensuji, you see a temple that Kobo Daishi built for his father. And so out of gratitude, after becoming a monk, he includes, honoring his parents as part of his practice. And this is a Japanese Buddhist perspective of gratitude. Japanese is arigatai, this feeling of gratitude. I think a lot of Buddhist practice has been distilled, Japanese Buddhist practice has been distilled into this one word, gratitude. So almost everything is done with this sense of gratitude, offering flowers, offering incense, and asking, what are you grateful for? So Kukai, in building this temple, I think was grateful for what his family had given him. So he built a temple there. Um, and if we think about our own spiritual practice, what are we grateful for? And if we have, I think, that in mind when we do spiritual practice, we'll bring a different element to it rather than just saying, okay, well, there's right speech, right action, right livelihood. When we read that, I think, especially in the West, we automatically think, right, what's wrong, and we get into kind of a judgmental kind of perspective. But if we think in terms of gratitude, where have we gotten, what have we done, then I think it has more power. And the most important thing, especially for spiritual practice, is um, what are we uh, what are we taking refuge in when things go wrong? So if things are going sideways, do we actually come back to our teaching? Do we recognize what has gone wrong or not? I think that's going to be our right mindfulness. Are we aware and or not? So the arigatai, that gratitude, is kind of that very simple recognition of what we should be doing, or what's really helping us or not. So there's a lot of things like this, I think, from Kukai's life that are instructional if we really reflect on how it might help us. So the poem goes on. In the 15th year of his age, in the springtime, he left his native village and went to Kyoto, where he diligently studied all of the doctrines of Confucianism. But he found that they contained no wisdom wherein he might put his trust. So in the our modern system, where everyone, you go to high school, then you go to college, or you go to trade school, or something along these lines. At that time, if you showed promise, you'd get a tutor, and you'd study the Confucian classics, the 5 great books, and you'd apply for the civil service exam, and you'd hope for a government job. So Kukai showed that promise, so he was sent to the capital to study with his uncle and studied Confucianism, studied the Chinese classics. So the Japanese had set up the same kind of government structure. He was, by all records, a phenomenal student. His calligraphy was great. He mastered the Confucian classics, but he was not happy. He felt that they really didn't answer kind of the deeper questions that he had in his life. So I'll first pause and say the Confucian classics are filled with wisdom. They are wonderful to study even to this day, and provide a wealth of information on history, politics, poetry, philosophy, and sometimes I hope that people in Washington, D.C. had studied them in terms of government decision making. However, I think here you see sort of deeper questions about humanity that Kukai felt needed to be addressed in a different way. So he drops out of school. So these days, if you drop out of school, what do people do? They drop out and they start a band, or maybe they travel. Or our best hopes these days of college dropouts is they go to Silicon Valley and start a startup and make millions of dollars. So this is a different type of dropout. Didn't fit any of those categories. He decides to undertake ascetic practices and study Buddhism. And it's not, and I think the poem makes clear, and so does his writing, that it wasn't just for himself. He wasn't just, well, I'm dissatisfied, I want to drop out of society. He does it because he's looking for answers about, the nature of human society and people in general that aren't answered in the Confucian classics. So I point that out just of our kind of ongoing theme of gratitude. There's an element of gratitude in his actions, that he's never forgetting, other people when he's doing, dropping out of school. So what was your goal when you were 15? What was your goal when you were 19? Were you thinking about all sentient beings and all of humanity at that age, and trying to accord your actions to help all people? Maybe not. That's okay. Maybe you're just thinking about the latest, movie or concert to go to. That's okay. But I think the reason, Kukai is behind me here is because of that that perspective and that vow he had. So the poem goes on. In his search after the truth, he learned all Buddhist doctrines. Of all the Buddhas, he learned to trust, especially in Hojo, whom he made a special deity. So he begins this process of studying Buddhism, something that he undertook for 10 years and spent majority of that time in Shikoku province, wandering around and undergoing ascetic training, studying Buddhism. This was not simple. This was not a modern retreat where you're going to have gourmet meals every night and it's going to be very relaxing and something along those lines. I've been to some of the training spaces. We're talking caves, cliffs, and deep in the forest. Been very difficult exposure to the elements, and I think most people would have given up if they thought it was going to be kind of a romantic notion. So this was a very serious training. So it's also important to kind of keep in mind because historically we think, or read about Kukai's life and pitch for the book. Professor Hakeda gives a really good introduction to his life in the beginning of the text. But it goes on, what I think is missing is just how difficult this training was and how long it would have taken him. So the poem continues, but his mind was so nimble that though he learned but one thing or two, he could thence deduce 1,000. Many are the ways, he said in the Sangoshiki, but Buddhism is the best of all. So Kukai is considered to have had a superior intellect and memory. So not just ability to memorize, but also just understanding of the teaching. And you see this in a lot of his writings where he's comparing Buddhist concepts to aspects of Chinese history and Chinese classics. And if you're really well versed in those areas, his writings provide quite a bit of detail. It's very impressive, the cross references and examples that he uses drawn right out of the Confucian classics. So just that grasp of the Chinese classics is often, in and of itself, is quite impressive. But also to have been able to, again, write all this without access to the internet or a private library is impressive too. So it goes on. At Moroto and Tosa, he was performing his devotions. A star fell from heaven and entered his mouth. At midnight, an evil dragon came forth against him. He spat upon it, and with his saliva killed it. So wait, I thought there's no killing in Buddhism. So obviously it's symbolic of his demons and overcoming his difficulties and things like that. So this portion of the poem discusses when he was doing the Gomonjiho, the 1 million recitations of Kokuzo's mantra. So it says that in the morning near the finish, he saw the planet Venus and that the star entered his body. So he had this experience. So this is, again, getting into the really difficult practices that he underwent during this time and what he did with his time. So when Kukai goes to China later, he has this background of 10 years of deep training already. And it's not that he learned everything in a short amount of time. He had laid quite a foundation. So it was in the 19th year of his age that, looking up to Gonzo as his religious guide, he took upon himself the vows of the bodhisattvas and became a homeless shramana, striving after enlightenment and wearing the black silk robe of the Buddhist priest. So the priest Gonzo was his first teacher. So he had a teacher in Japan that actually gave him the precepts, and thereafter he became a shramana, the novice Buddhist priest. So in Japan at that time, you couldn't receive full ordination unless you had official government approval. It was the same in China. The temple couldn't just ordain you as a full monk. There was a limit every year, how many people could be ordained. So this, I think, is helpful in terms of our podcast topic that we put out earlier today. That do you need a teacher? What's the purpose of a teacher? How do you find a teacher? Within Buddhism, especially, there has to be somebody to give you the precepts to sort of set you on the path. But the fact that you have a teacher doesn't mean that you can't surpass that teacher, that you can't have other teachers necessarily. But Kukai definitely did have somebody that he relied on early on to guide his practice and to give him specific practices to do. And so the Gumonjiho is one of those early practices that really, I think, shaped a lot of his later practice and understanding of Shingon.
So the Gumonjiho came before he went to China?
Yes. Yeah, he practiced the Gumonji before he went. The Gumonjiho is, a very difficult practice in that it takes quite a long time and it's ascetic practice. So there's at least one place in Shikoku that's believed to be where he practiced Gumonji and actually developed the name Kukai as his priest name, based on sitting for so long looking at the sky and the sea. So Kukai. So the poem goes on at Hosshinji in the province of Idzu and in other places besides. He discovered the hot springs bubbling out of the earth, and it was he that demonstrated to the world the use of coal. So Kukai did a lot of exploration, and one of the things that he is especially known for was helping people in the local area, both in terms of digging wells, finding water. He had quite a bit of knowledge. Some of that knowledge was brought back from China, but a lot of it was very practical knowledge. So Kukai is much celebrated amongst the local people for introducing a lot of basic science, weather prediction, very famous also for dam building. So his contributions to humanity were not just spiritual. He was actually, there's quite a bit of practical offerings to people. So there's a very strong appreciation for that, and the poem includes that, bringing back the knowledge of the use of coal and giving that to people.
Like gold?
Coal.
Oh,
coal. So before that, people were strictly burning wood or creating charcoal, but actually being able to burn and use coal was not well known. So the final portion, so the poem does cover his whole life, so we'll just cover the early days here. So the final stanza: inside the tower of the temple of Kumadera in Yamato, there was revealed to him the doctrine which was above all other. But as there was none whom he could question thereon, he received permission from the emperor to go to China for study. So that line commemorates him finding the Mahavajrayana Sutra. And after finding that, he goes around and asks people, is there anyone that can explain it? And finding no one that can explain it, he resolves to go to China to seek the Shingon teaching, which of course he does successfully, and we owe our presence to that trip. So this trip to China becomes a really important part of the history of Shingon, obviously. And the text does go on to detail a lot of his life, but I think it's important to think about, again, very few people are so interested in a book that they're going to risk their life to go to another country just to have it explained. So I think it really shows his appreciation, his gratitude, that it wasn't something that he was doing selfishly or only for his own interest. It was something that he really wanted to bring back to benefit others, especially the people in Japan. So, and really in a kind of, but for his trip, the teaching probably would have been lost in China just due to historical things, and it's very important kind of turning point in terms of the history of Buddhism in Japan as well. So a lot of other Buddhist schools relied heavily on the fact that Kukai set up kind of one of the first uniquely Japanese schools of Buddhism rather than strictly mimicking what was being done in China. So very, very important in that sense too. So if you look at kind of the whole breadth of this story, one of the things I want people to realize, what's important is not, just what Kukai did, but what his motivation was, what he had in mind. And, how do we practice that? What is our motivation when we do things? Can we make our motivations bigger? How do our actions help other people? And then I think we have a little bit of like, how do I practice Buddhism in daily life? what am I going to do? Who else is included? Have I given thought to anyone else? That's how we practice Buddhism. It's not just on the cushion or armchair Buddhist, read the book. Oh, very interesting philosophy, right? So actual actions. So that's all for this evening. I appreciate you coming. So we'll do the final prayers and let people get on the road before it gets too dark. So.